I suspect many people will continue to drop in, but because I have a lot to cover and I want to make sure we have time to get to your questions, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Um, First of all, it's wonderful to see so many familiar names. I wish I could see your faces, but that is not a Zoom feature at this scale. But hello to all of you. And for those of you who don't know me, my name's Mia. I'm the founder of Design Department. I spent most of my time building products and teams like many of you. But over the past 8 years, I've spent my career and time and energy training many of you, working with your teams, but specifically making sure that we as a practice continue to evolve in our leadership and impact. And this year, some of you know, I started a new learning experience called Designing with AI. It started with a little experimentation and a Substack. And now we're doing training for teams. And now we have the Playbook. So the Playbook is a tool for you that you're all going to get access to after today. So today I'm going to share the highlights of the Playbook because it's too much to cover in an hour. I'm going to talk about the transition that we're going through, some high impact choices and things that you can do as a leader for your team, or if you're an individual contributor, things that you can change about your practice to prepare yourself. And then the PDF itself is kind of a combination of insights and resources as well as a workbook. There's some sections in there for you to think about planning for your team in terms of reskilling, annual planning, and change management. So lots of good stuff in there. I'm just going to do the highlights today. And then, of course, you'll have more. I did notice that there were so many great questions in the responses and registration that we're going to go ahead and do a second event. I'm going to do a discussion, just pure discussion 2 weeks from now. You'll all be invited to come back and continue the conversation. But I just wanted you to know that if your question doesn't get covered today, there will be more time. All right. So let's get started. So you all know, and that's why you're here, that AI is changing and it's changing fast. And in particular, it's changing not only what we make, and I'm sure many of you have experienced this already. Your teams are starting to build AI features and AI products, but also how we make. And there are some other impacts in terms of, resourcing and planning and layoffs and things like that. But I want to acknowledge that I think that it's going to change our discipline for the better. You may not believe it yet. That's okay. We're going to work through it and talk through it. But before I get too deep, I just want to acknowledge that there are legal, ethical, and bias concerns, and they are real. We've done several sessions on these concerns. I blog about them. It's built into our recommendations to acknowledge these challenges. We're not going to go through them in detail today because each one deserves extended time for us to really navigate it. But my point is, despite these concerns, I still believe that it's going to have positive impact on our discipline. That said, we have always been responsible for how we use our tools, and that is no different from AI. So as you start to think about implementing these practices, keep in mind that responsibility. So with AI, I think we can transform design for the better. And I've seen that in my own practice. I've seen that through experimentation. I'm starting to see that with some of the teams that we're working with. And this doesn't just come from hype. Like, I'm not trying to get more followers or whatever. Like, this is genuinely about the future of our practice. And this comes from a couple of different things that I'm going to share with you today. So, we ran a survey back in August, which seems like a long time ago, but it's not, to understand the impact of AI on teams' practices, perspectives, hiring, all of that stuff. So, some of that is in the workbook, and I'm going to share some of that with you today, but also from 8 years of teaching design teams and thinking about the challenges that we're facing. One of the most common questions I got on a regular basis was, "Hey, Mia, like, how do we get more time to do the important stuff? How do we get time for visioning? How do we hold space for more creativity, going deeper?" Well, I think this is it. I think this is our answer, but we have to be really smart and careful and thoughtful about how we integrate these practices into what we do. So, as I go through this, I would love to hear questions as we go. There is a Q&A feature that should be open, so feel free to drop your questions into the Q&A feature because they are most likely going to get lost in chat. I have a couple colleagues here that are going to help me today to navigate this. I have Janet is here, who's, if you need anything, Janet will take care of that from a technology perspective. And I have a colleague here, Jeremy, who's going to help me go through these questions at the Q&A at the end. So please feel free to ask questions as we go. And like I said, if we don't get to them today, in the next session in 2 weeks, I will certainly try and get to them. So This is a challenging statement. I know not everyone believes this, but I do think that there is a path here that is going to be better for us. Now, just noting the shift in sentiment, um, when we talked to these folks with this last survey and got some feedback from them on how it's impacting their perception and their work, a lot of people believe that it's going to have impact on the industry. The sentiment was mixed, as you would expect, but it was more positive than I expected. So keep that in mind that it is shifting towards the positive. But that doesn't mean that as a leader, you won't have to navigate the ups and downs, the concerns, the questions, the fears, the anxiety that comes with that. And for the folks that are starting to implement this or think about it, they're already seeing three primary areas where it's starting to change and they're seeing impact. So these are the more obvious use cases that they're seeing on their team. So that includes efficiency, which we've already seen touted by many companies. It's in a lot of reports, and our peers in engineering are already starting to see 30% efficiency with Copilot. So there's some standards that are being set for us in terms of expectations, workflow transformation, of course, because our tools are changing, and then role changes and new opportunities. So we'll talk about that as well. One thing I want to note is that generative AI and AI in general is the worst it's ever going to be at this point in time. And we'll say that tomorrow and the next day and the next day. It is going to get better. But there are a lot of things that don't work. And I'm going to show you some diagrams around where we are in terms of maturity, but one of the things I want to note is that this is your opportunity to understand where it does work and why it works in these areas. Because I'm already working with leaders where their executives are saying, hey, shouldn't we do this? Shouldn't we do that? And those are not valid use cases yet. So it's really important that you start to have a perspective and opinion on where it is now and where it's going. So you can start to plan for it, particularly through your kind of team planning and annual planning. So AI is changing what we make, and just give you a couple of highlights of what we're seeing across teams. And I suspect many of you are experiencing this as well. So this year, many folks experienced some shifts in their priorities, new AI features, new technologies being integrated into existing features and services and products, but also new products are being developed. So obviously that was a big shift for a lot of teams this year in terms of, wow, now we're building new things potentially with technologies that we don't have experience in, which of course leads us to hiring. So folks have a demand to have experienced creatives on their team who can build this work, can build these products and services. But of course, most of us don't have experience building this yet. We haven't built AI products or we haven't used generative AI. So there's an opportunity here. There's an opportunity for those of you who are looking for jobs to skill up and get yourself in a great position in the market. And for those of you who aren't hiring, but you have talent on your team, this is where you have to reskill because there's not a lot of people out there in the market who have these skills. And we also know that this is changing how we make. And this is the majority of what I'm going to talk about and the majority of what's covered in the playbook because it fundamentally changes how we get things out the door, how we work together, what it means for our expectations, performance management, all of that. Okay. So in terms of how we make, I honestly was surprised at how many people were using generative AI. I mean, I'm teaching it, but at the same time, I was surprised how many people were using it. So, of the people that responded, a 74% had already used it in their work. The use cases make sense in terms of where they're using it, in terms of content generation, summarization, ideation, brainstorming, and automation of tasks. Those are where the tools are the most mature. So, that clearly makes sense. But when we looked across all the use cases, this is kind of that spread of where that was being used. The thing that I was most surprised by is the third one, which is research or content synthesis. I'm excited about the opportunity, but I am really concerned about the quality that we're getting there. But content and copy makes sense, images make sense because the maturity of those products are there. Presentations are not bad. I do most of my presentations with AI tools now, but you can see that kind of long curve really reflecting the maturity of the products. But people are experimenting, and that's great. Of the specific tools, these are the tools, and I'm not surprised by them either because of the maturity of them. We know ChatGPT has had the most massive growth of any product we've ever seen. So, of course, that's the tool that most people are using. It also has some of the more kind of safeguards around data with the enterprise versions, Midjourney, Dolly, Bard. This was before Dolly 3. So keep in mind that was before people even had access through ChatGPT or Bing and things like that. Bard, Stable Diffusion, Firefly. I suspect Firefly is going to move up quite quickly, but we'll see how that goes. So all of these are in the playbook for you to take a look at and dig into more. The thing that I find concerning and I want you to think about in terms of your team planning is this slide, which I know is a lot of numbers, but the short story of this is most people expect training, but they don't know when they're going to get it from their teams. And a lot of that comes from the last year, right? Layoffs, budget tightening, all of the stuff that's transformed our teams and our industry over the last year gives people doubt that they're going to get the support they need. And this is where I, as someone who cares about our discipline, is a little bit nervous that this is changing really fast and people aren't sure where they're going to get the support they need to transform the way that they work. So if executives are saying, "Hey, when is your team going to perform in a different way? When are we going to get more efficiency? How are we changing our process?" But we're not planning for the work, and it is work to move from where we are to where we're headed, that's problematic. So, something to think about in terms of timing and process. So, this is a simple slide. I joke, simple, but this comes from hours and hours and hours of me actually sitting down and testing as many AI products as I can get my hands on. So, of all the generative AI tools, so basically the AI tools that will generate content, images, video, UI, all of that stuff, we have a resource, by the way, where I've rated every single one of these tools for our community members. But this is a mapping of my expectations based on the speed in which they've been moving. That's going to move us from this experimental phase where it's fun to play, it's cool to try it out, but it's not necessarily ready to integrate into professional workflows, to a hybrid state where we're now entering for multiple categories. And hybrid, what I mean by that is it's not perfect. It's not integrated into your primary tools. You're probably going to have more tools than less for some period of time. But then it's going to move to an integrated state. The best example of this is Adobe. So, Adobe in the last few weeks has integrated multiple generative AI models into the primary tools, which means that you can stay in the Adobe suite, use generative AI, but never leave it. So, we will move towards that integrated state. Maybe that's with Figma and other tools. So, right now, we're kind of in this hybrid place where it is going to be, let me just say, slightly painful, but possible to use generative AI with your existing workflows and tools. So that's very much true for code and has been for a while. Text and images. Most of your text and images can be leveraged, can be created, edited, iterated on in these tools. But I just want to say for the hundredth time, the UI stuff is not ready. So if you are on the product side of things and you want to build websites and products, those tools exist, but I am not teaching them right now because I don't think they're ready for your professional workflows. There are some that are right on the cusp, and I'll let you know when I think they're ready, but it's coming. So even though it's not ready, that doesn't mean that your team shouldn't be preparing. And a huge part of that is because there's new skills that are required. So, one of the things that I think is misleading is that this natural language input, so the fact that we can kind of just write any kind of sentence and input that as a prompt, it makes it look a lot easier than it is. Because, yes, you can type anything into Dolly and get an image out, but that isn't necessarily creative work that you want to put out into your product, services, brand, etc. So, it's important to acknowledge that there is some work there. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that means in a minute. Okay, so I'm not going to go through all the disciplines in detail, but I'm going to give you a high level kind of overarching framework that you can use to think about how the creative disciplines are going to shift. So I think this is, abstract enough that it represents all creative disciplines, so writing, research, etc. I think we can look at our work moving forward in a couple of different buckets. So I don't want to argue with you about double diamond, single diamond. Let's just assume there is a creative process outlined here in black. And we can bucket our responsibilities, our current tasks, the things we make, the things we do with others that are part of our roles and responsibility. So at the bottom in that coral color, these are the things that I think we can actually augment with generative AI either now or in the near future. And I've mapped this out for the different disciplines to say this is a task that you can already do with generative AI versus these are tasks that you're going to be able to do in the near future. And that includes all the stuff that I would hope many of us don't want to do as much as we used to. This is the drawing of the boxes over and over again. It's expanding our ideas. It's thinking of, other ways of framing these sentences. It's generating lots of storyboards and concept images. This is where we're going to get our efficiency and speed. Now, this is also where we have to learn to direct the AI. This is where we have to build our literacy and our ability to AI art direct. So, in order to leverage that section at the bottom, you're going to have to develop new skills on the team. It's not just learning tools, it's actually new skills. And this has become incredibly apparent to me in the last 6 months and teaching teams how to direct AI that we think we have the language, we think we know how to communicate our visions really clearly, but we're not as good as we think we are. And there's a translation layer that has to happen between my vision and my language into the language that the AI is going to understand. So I'll talk about that in a minute. But this is the area of skill development that's necessary. Then at the top, that's the creative stuff. That's the human stuff that I don't think is going to be replaced anytime soon. That's our strategy, that's our creativity, that's generating new campaigns and new ideas. That is the fun stuff. I mean, fun stuff plus the communication, collaboration, and alignment that's required to get those ideas out the door. That is where, if we do this right, if we leverage the AI to actually expedite certain parts of our process to help us learn and explore and implement more rapidly, then we actually get to spend more time doing the things that matter, working on the problems, figuring out what problems we should work on and why, going deeper, learning faster. That is actually the win here. Now, it's not perfect. There's challenges along the way. I admit all of that. But this is the opportunity that we have at hand. And so let's just take a quick look. I know these bubbles are going to be super small on screen, but I mapped this out for product designers. So if we actually look at tasks and responsibilities across the creative process, there's many things that we'll be able to do in the near term as product designers. So the dark coral ones are things that we can already do: concepting, storyboarding, content creation, those types of things we can already start to experiment with. 6 months away is the light coral, the next set of bubbles. Those are things that we're probably going to be able to do soon. And the outlines are things that are probably about a year away. These are my estimates. Who knows? We'll see what actually happens. But the point is it's coming. So just within the idea or the ideation phase for product designers, there's going to be a split between the things that we can highly leverage, like our understanding of the market, our ability to come up with great ideas, to develop ideas in the context of business strategy and communicate it that way. And then there's all the stuff that we're going to be able to augment with AI, our ability to concept really quickly, to experiment, to test some things, to prototype really fast, which will help us focus on the things that are important and that matter the most. And I think that's the thing. If nothing else you take away from this is that there is an opportunity here. But all the leaders in the room, you're probably going, oh, okay. So that means reskilling. That means new levels and expectations. That means setting expectations with our executives in terms of what they can expect and when. What does this mean for headcount? Exactly. Those are the questions that I want you to start thinking about now, because this is coming. It's here. I don't think it's going anywhere. And so we need to start planning for that. But the positive lens is that this means all of the disciplines that have been striving for that strategic impact, it's around the corner. So imagine if product designers get to focus more on product vision. I certainly would have appreciated that. Or content and brand designers get to focus more on telling the stories that matter. Researchers can transform their insights into action without leveraging, engineering time or design time, and many more ways in which this can impact. The thing we have to remember is that creativity defines us, not our tools. And I have seen and been a part of way too many debates on Twitter or whatever it's called now about, which tools we should use and why. And we just have to get over ourselves for a second. Because I don't know where the tools are going to land. I can tell you what's good now and what we should be using now, but like any market, this is going to shift. And we have to stay centered on what makes us awesome, how our creativity creates impact, and focus less on the tools. The tools are where we're going to have to experiment and move and iterate. But ultimately, that value partner seat, it's possible because suddenly we will have more time to do the things that matter. But I have to acknowledge, if this is the opportunity, there's also risk. I'm sure many of you have heard this quote or statement. It's been reused a lot. I think it originally came from this IBM study, but AI is not going to replace us, but people using AI will replace people who don't. I'm already seeing this. I can't name names, but there are already teams that are starting to do this. So that is one potential risk, but I think there's some other things we have to think about in terms of what's happening for our discipline. So was it last week or not too long ago, we did a session on the democratization of design. I think it's here. Now more people than ever have access to our tools. That doesn't mean that they can design, but maybe soon it will actually be real design. And we have to be careful, not only because they're going to have tools and have access to that, but because there's this perception that maybe AI is better than it should be right now or is. I just saw some threads and some conversations about some famous tech guy tweeted that you can now have ChatGPT review all of your screens. It's not true. It will give you the best probable responses based on content that's been written about usability, but it's not actually going to review your comps. So we have to be able to know, where is it actually democratizing tooling? Where is it not? And how do we hold a stance on the quality of those tools? Our peers are already reskilling. Engineers are already using new tools. PMs are developing new ways of developing strategy, et cetera. Marketing folks are changing. I'm on a panel this week about marketing. It's happening. New expectations around performance, already happening. There's so many reports out there that says this is what performance is going to look like. This is how it's going to change. That's a new battle we're up against. We are going to have to perform differently. Now, if we're in control of how our work changes, then we can get that efficiency, but also make sure we're doing the work that we love. If we fall behind, then someone else is probably going to be telling us how to do that. And I do think role boundaries are going to continue to blur because people are going to have access to these tools, because we're going to be able to go from concept to code in seconds, minutes, whatever it is. It's going to get blurrier than it's ever been. So it's really important for us to be able to communicate, illustrate the value of our work. Okay, I really wish I could keep up with all of your conversation and chat, but I know my team is tracking them and taking notes, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. But I want to make sure I get through a couple of recommendations, and then we'll open up chat and have a conversation. So I have synthesized the playbook into 4 things you can do next. There's more in the playbook for you to consider, but these are the top 4 that I want all teams to take away and to think about. So I'm going to quickly go through these and then we'll chat a little bit. So first and foremost, I think the most important thing, if your team has not started on this journey at all, you need to start with curiosity. And what I mean by that is really learnings from my years of teaching change management, living in startups and all of that fun change. This diagram is something we use in our workshops, and it is the evolution, the experience we go through in transformation and change. Now, often change is an announcement or a particular moment, but for many of us, we experience that over time. A reorg, a new boss, AI. We're going to go through multiples of these waves. But for the leaders in the room, it's important to acknowledge that as we go through change, our productivity changes. I'm sure you've all seen it. Layoff happens, productivity shifts. New reorg, productivity shifts. AI going to continuously shift. And a lot of that is because we are processing as humans the change. But the thing that I've seen repeatedly that gets us back up from that dip, back up to that new beginning, that new chapter, every single time is curiosity. We may not like it, we may not want it, we may have feelings about it, but if we embrace curiosity, if nothing else, it gives us the opportunity to see new, to learn new things, to be inspired. Not everyone believes this, but I now feel more creative than I ever have in my career because I can use Midjourney and other tools in my creative process. I didn't know that was going to be there. I found it. I found it through curiosity. And if you can inspire your team to look at this through the lens of curiosity, you're much more likely to get them to navigate the changes with you and find ways to transform the team and the way that you work. So, number one, shift in mindset, necessary to get us through the fear, the anxiety, all the things that may come with that. The second thing is a creative council, or you can call it whatever you want. You may already have some of your creative team members on a larger organization, cross-functional team where you're talking about generative AI and AI overall and how you're going to protect data and security. But I encourage you to have a creative specific group or cohort that is looking at how you work and guiding the team through this transition. Because there's a lot of complex topics, challenges that you're going to have to document, decide on. So maybe it's a sub cohort of your leadership team. But some of the things that you may want to do with this creative council are things like really starting to define practices that acknowledge some of the risks that I mentioned at the beginning, the legal and ethical concerns. So, developing a language for people to prompt for diversity. So, if you use people in your branding, for instance, and you want to use generative AI to help create more stories and more content about the people that use your products, if you don't know the language to prompt for diversity, it gets incredibly uncomfortable. And we've talked about this in a bunch of workshops, and people are just afraid of saying the wrong thing. So, the best thing you can do is develop a library that gives people the words to actually prompt for diversity because bias is baked in. Every stereotype you can think of that exists in the world, it's also in generative AI. So, your team needs to start develop those libraries and the acumen to do that well. Or thinking about processes that will counter bias that's going to sneak in. So do you spend 2 or 3 minutes at the end of every of every critique to be able to evaluate, is there any bias here? Is there anything we should be concerned about? You have to start building a practice of asking questions, being curious. What are we allowing to sneak into our work by using generative AI in this process? Other things like advocating for training or documenting successful workflows, there's going to be a central team that hopefully helps move things forward. Okay, now here's the big piece for most of your team members, which is learning to direct your AI intern. I jokingly call it an AI intern because it's the first time that every single team member on your team, regardless of their title and level, is going to have someone, eh, the AI, who can help them generate their work. And the thing about having an intern, which is lovely, is they are super eager and excited to help you build things, but they have different life experiences, maybe different culture, language, etc. And so just because I have an idea of what something should be, it doesn't mean that they're going to execute it on the same way. And so directing humans means we have to be incredibly articulate and succinct about our art direction. And nothing is different in terms of how we direct AI. We have to be incredibly succinct and clear. And we have to recognize that my understanding of the word playful is different than the AI's understanding of playful. And it's going to change the way that we communicate our ideas. And we can start to practice this together with the other humans in the room and get better at our direction, particularly as we start to practice and integrate. So I'll give you a couple examples. Anyone who's going to generate images of their user base or, visualize stories has to be able to art direct just like they would in a real shoot. They have to be able to art direct the lighting, the color, the composition, all the bits and pieces. But most of us didn't have that training. Some creatives didn't even have like art history or other programs that would have helped them develop that acumen over time. And so building a set of tokens in a library, just like your design principles, your brand standards, all of that sort of stuff, we're now going to need a shared dictionary of the tokens, which are basically the words that are recognized, words or phrases that are recognized by the generative AI model. Just because we have a word we want to use, it doesn't mean that that model understands it. So there is a translation that has to happen between our vision and the model. And this is part of the practice and building these libraries and understanding the tools or understanding the different types of shots, right? Like there's a whole language here that not everyone has access to. And it gets even more complex when we start thinking about our principles. So I already mentioned playful, but I've worked with several teams to think about how to translate their principles into prompts. And unfortunately, most of the language we use, simple, playful, those types of things do not translate to tokens. What you're imagining as playful right now is probably different than what I'm imagining. And that's true for the AI intern as well. It has a completely different set of experience, aka training material, that tells what playful is. So playful might mean a very sophisticated, bubbly, bright, vibrant brand for us, but for our AI, our generative AI tools, it might just look like a childlike drawing. So we have to get incredibly specific. We have to learn to craft our prompts. So this is one of the first skills that all teams need to develop, to craft prompts that actually leverage our vision, so our creativity, and translate that into a prompt that isn't just natural language, but leverages tokens in the language of the machine to be able to get the results that we want. People are often surprised the first few times, and I'm sure some of you have experienced this, that it's not as easy as you think. And so this AI art direction requires skills, tools, frameworks to start doing that. We have a visual framework that we use that really helps people think about the pieces and the parts for the architecture or the framework of that prompt. It's not just a sentence, it's actually a structure of communicating our vision to the AI. And that's going to entail a whole bunch of things, right? When it comes to images, and the reason why I teach images first is because it is immediate feedback. You can tell whether your prompt was right or wrong. But when it comes to big lumps of copy, whether that's research synthesis or content that you're writing for a blog post, it is really hard to assess, is this correct? Is there bias in here? Is this good? Image, we can see a lot quicker. So I really recommend that teams learn with images first because that feedback is concrete, direct, and immediate, and copy comes after that. Um, and that's improving, right? We can now get images out of these tools, not all of them, not all of them are the same. Midjourney being the highest quality output consistently across different mediums and styles, but it is almost image like, photography like. So now's the time to start that experimentation and learn how to direct AI art direct. That is a new skill that will likely be on our levels and job descriptions in the future, if not now. Last but not least, and then we'll get to some questions, is experiment with workflows. So if you're concerned, if you're not sure where to start where there's one or two use cases where you're confident that the tool is mature enough and that you can actually leverage it in your process. So this is things like storyboards, concept sketches, maybe it's mood boards, maybe it's content for scripts, maybe it's slides. There's lots of safe places, particularly internal content, where you don't have to worry about copyright, legal issues. It is a process product, right? It is stuff that you're using to move the process along. This is the perfect place to experiment because it's low risk, easy to generate, and it's a safe place to start experimenting, learning, and developing the acumen that you need to develop as a team. So again, that can be illustrations. It can be, inspiration for icons, logos. Like you're not going to generate them now because you can't get high quality vector yet, although that model was just released. It could be product photography. There's lots of things that you can do here that can contribute and create a space for learning. That's the thing is I want to see more teams learning now before it's too late because we need to be ready when the tools are. We need to be ready for when those more robust tools that can generate UI and generate video and all of that fun stuff, we have the tools, the language to do some of that prompting. So I think we have an opportunity here as a discipline, not just as team leaders, but truly as a discipline to shape our disciplines for the better. But the key is we have to show up, we have to ask hard questions, we have to embrace curiosity and start experimenting now. Okay, so I can tell that there's lots of questions that are already popping up. I'm going to ask Jeremy to join me. Jeremy, if you just turn your video on, you should pop up here. Hello, welcome, Jeremy.
Hi. Morning, everybody.
For those of you who haven't been to some of our events, Jeremy and I have been exploring a lot of these topics and conversations, teaching teams. So you will see him around. You want to do a quick intro?
Yes, of myself. Here we go. I'm Jeremy Summers. I am a creative director of many years and got very obsessed with generative AI very early on. I started and currently run what me and I think is the very first AI assisted creative agency. And that was about 18 months ago when things were really, really shitty. And I was in terms of AI output. And I got really obsessed with like, how is this going to change our entire industry as creatives and designers? And how can I start to put things out into market now to really learn different processes of not just the output, but also how to talk to clients about AI and how do we price for things like this and, like all of these different things. And so me and I connected pretty early on and are very much on the same wavelength, furiously answering tens of thousands of questions across chat and QA here. Mia,
I'm
I think like
excited. Yeah.
one thing that a lot of people are asking and that a lot of people ask in the intake form is trying to like differentiate between current hype and what we get
Mhm.
to see out on Twitter or X and in the news cycle, and newsletters, YouTube, etc. And what's actually usable now? How like, is there a place to go? How, like to figure that out? How do we actually navigate that?
Yeah, there's a lot of hype and there's a lot of crap out there. And I mean, I've included some of this in some of the processes and the community work, which is there are a lot of prompts out there, for instance, that are just completely wrong, or there are tools and recommendations that are completely wrong. So, for instance, a lot of people recommend using camera types and lenses in your prompt, but I have tested many of them, and most of them are not registered, meaning it's not understood and it is not used in your generation. The only tool right now that gives you that feedback is Midjourney, by the way. So people can put it in the prompt and get an image, but are they actually getting what they want from that? No, because that is not a language that is consistently understood by the generative AI. So there's a lot of crap out there. My recommendation is to stop getting distracted by all the hype and start the practicing. We have a tool that I'm happy to share with everyone that reviews all the different tools that is really clear about that. And we're going to talk about that next week in our discussion, Jeremy, around how to evaluate tools. But I think the key thing is to start to do that definition for yourself. What is good for us and why? Is there anything you
Yeah.
add to that, Jeremy?
Yeah, I think the other thing is where the explosion of the just the sheer amount of tools that are coming out because people are using AI to build AI tools, right? So where we've seen the barrier to entry to create a tool to create something completely removed, which means that there is 100 or 1,000x more tools and applications coming out almost daily than we've ever seen ever. And so, Mira, you and I struggle with this all the time. We're constantly slacking each other. Did you see this? Did you see this? Did you see this? And the answer is always no. Even though we're in the same, very much in the same sphere of this stuff, we are finding out new things. And so, one of the big things that we do is share other curators' resources, the people who are already doing the work. I mean, I guess for everyone in the call, like today, that's you and me, is, we're out there doing the research and testing these things. And we've been compiling this list that you say inside the Designing with AI community. And we're consistently updating it because it has to be consistently updated for a myriad
Yeah.
of reasons. But I think
Yeah.
that's the key is making sure that rather than going out and no one has time to test 1,000 different tools and to figure them out, and no one's out there reviewing them. There's no nerd wallet for AI tools because that company would have to be way too massive.
That's my
Um,
Notion document. That's what it is,
that's
Jeremy.
the notion doc. Yeah, 100%.
And I get it.
Yes.
We're doing this all the time and it still feels hard to keep up with it, which is why I created Designing with AI because it's really hard to keep up with it and filter out the hype versus the quality stuff. And someone asked me, folks who know me, I've only taught live workshops for the last 8 years until Designing with AI. And now it's video with some live labs, but it's video so I can quickly edit it because it's changing really fast in terms of, what are the best tools and how do we use them. So there are resources, and I'll share some more of that we are creating. But I think the most important thing is to filter, not get lost in the hype, and truly experiment.
Yeah, agreed.
What else are
We
they asking, Jeremy?
also have a lot of questions about workflow, and a bunch of different workflows. We have product designers and graphic designers and artists, and like there's team leaders and all sorts of people here today. A lot of people are asking about like obviously very specific workflows for them, for their role, for their company. Um, there's no one question. The question is like, how do we figure out what a workflow is for us? Or how do I figure out what it is for me in my role?
Yeah. Well, we're gonna do a whole hour on that next week, so join us for that. Um,
Sure.
but I think that again, I hate to sound like a, repeating record here, but I think the key thing is to find the tools that help you quickly focus on what quality is for you. And I have a framework that I use for what quality is for different tools and to start mapping it out. Jeremy is going to show this like robust system he has for thinking about how to, kind of think through workflows and which tools to use. And like I said, we're in a hybrid stage. So this is not going to be where we end up, but depending on your discipline, some graphic designers and more visual designers, you may be able to use generative AI completely in the Adobe suite and that's it. Because now Firefly, which is their generative AI model, is now built into all of those tools. It's in Photoshop, it's in Illustrator. You can get vector and bitmap. So you may not have to leave, and it may not be that hybrid. But for other disciplines, it's going to be a little bit messy because it's not integrated into the other tools that we're using to draw, all the other stuff that we make. So I think it's really about finding a couple of different paths and experimenting with it and see what works. Share that with the team. Again,
Yeah.
pick one or two use cases. Don't try and overhaul it all at once because that's going to be a mess. It's
We
like
tried. It's not good.
it would be like the switch from Photoshop to Sketch. Like the whole thing will just break down. So don't do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And we are gonna dive much deeper on that next week. And I think, because there are so many different disciplines and workflows and different people that we're talking to, we're gonna try to focus on the strategy of workflow. Where do you find things? How do you step through them? And so we've set up internally, we've set up a bit of a process for that to make it a little bit easier on ourselves. Um, a lot of questions about um sorry, I live in Hawaii, everyone. There are, roosters crowing. It's really early for me, so I'm like, um, distracted by all the roosters. A lot of questions about, like, what stage are we at? Like, you talked about, like, some of the tools are ready, and we have that beautiful slide which says, "Cool, tools are ready for production in A and B now, and in C, D, and E, they're not gonna be ready for X amount of months or years," we think. Um, how do we know, you and I talk about it a lot, how early we are.
We're early, but I think expectations are shifting. So you could say, "Oh, we're early, I don't need to care," or "We haven't figured out the legal issues." Well, legal is gonna take a really long time, so tech is not gonna wait for that. Tech is gonna move forward, thanks capitalism. So we have to move with the expectations and with the industry, and like I said, because our engineering counterparts have already been using generative AI longer than us, numbers about their performance is coming out. So I feel like we have to start moving too. But I want us to move with our eyes wide open. Like I don't want us to just stumble into it and make mistakes and build bad things because we're not aware of what we're using it for. So we're early, which means now's the time to start building some of these understandings, new skills, experimenting with safe workflows. Because I guarantee next year, I'm going to have a lot of conversations with leaders where they're like, "Hey, Mia, like, if my team doesn't hit this sort of efficiency, I'm gonna have to lay them off. Like, how do I do it?" Like, that's coming, and maybe not across all industries. I do think some industries are gonna be more careful, because of data and privacy and things like that. So they may be a little bit slower to adopt, which is true with all technology, but that's not gonna be true for everyone. So we're early, yet now's the time because we have enough tools that we can use. Anything you would add to that, Jeremy? Different perspective?
No, I keep, every time that you tell me that we're early, I'm like, we're like twice as early as that. I think that we're so early. And I think, one of the pieces of proof is that, with 500 people sign up to today's chat, and everybody is asked to give us a question. And going through 500 questions from industry leaders and people who are, or like a lot of people who are both new to this, but a lot of people who are also really into it at this stage, looking through 500 questions from our peers was to me like very telling as to how early I think we actually are. And we're so early. The fact that there's no single resource, as I say, like there's no nerd wallet, publicly out there, we have our resource, but there's nothing like that out there because it was all moving so fast. We're still in the most tools are developed by engineers stage.
Yeah.
They are not developed by designers and product designers or creators. We're not seeing designers make products for designers yet,
Yeah.
that's how early we are.
We're in the technology race, not the product race.
Totally.
So, Journey is accessible via Discord because it was created by an engineering team, right? And so a lot of our technologies are hard to interact with right now, but if you're willing to jump through some hoops, then you can get some really great outcomes. That's going to change. We all know that from the technology shifts. We'll get more interfaces, we'll get web-based things, we'll get better tools, but then that means everyone has access to those tools. So it's coming.
Yeah.
It's just not going to replace our need to learn acumen and to be able to prompt. I've been thinking about drawing, trying to design interfaces for better AI art direction. And the reality is there's just not scalable interfaces for that. So even as we move from technology to product race, we're still going to have to learn these skills.
Agreed. Um, Katie Peterson asks, I'm going to throw you a softball. Are there any training programs you'd recommend for novice students of mid-journey or relevant prompting? If your brain a
Thanks for the
break.
softball, Jeremy. Yes. So there's a couple options for you. You can either call us and we're doing live training for teams. So we customize just like we've done for years for business acumen, design excellence, all those things. We're doing it for AI now. So we can design a custom program for your team based on your skills and industry and comfort level. Or if you're an individual contributor or there's just a couple people on your team that want to learn, the Designing with AI membership, which is basically an online learning community. Again, I've never done a curriculum in this format, but it's really fun because the curriculum is now in videos, so you can do it at your own pace. You get access to all my tools, all of our posts on kind of recommendations and comparisons. We do every other week live labs where we'll like hop in and we'll make some stuff together. We'll review new tools. I'll give you prompt help. We'll make things together, which is really fun. And then we have an exclusive speaker series specifically for that community. So it's a great way to learn as the technology evolves because my commitment is I'm going to adapt the curriculum as the tools evolve. I'm not going to teach you anything that's not relevant yet. And so right now it's mostly visual. Our copy prompting is coming out soon, and then that's going to evolve. So I'm biased, but there's also plenty of um, training just on understanding LLMs and the core technology. Like Google has a great free program for that. But if you want things that are specific to creative teams, that's what we're making. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Um, oh, Casey, this is an intense question. Right, man, now that you had your break.
Okay.
All right. Casey asks,
Bring
do
it.
we think that as companies begin to integrate tools into their workspace, i.e. like Copilot, Duet, or ChatGPT Enterprise, for example,
Mhm.
that the right guardrails are going to be in place for safe closed loop exploration?
Probably not.
Absolutely not. Are we talking
I mean,
about
I've worked in technology for a long time, so that's not going to be anyone's priority. Just like interfaces for prompting is not most teams' priority right now. Their priority is scale. They're trying to win a game. So, do I think that's going to be there? No. It's going to get better, like the enterprise versions and some of the API, but it's not perfect, which means just like any other tool we've ever used, your team needs to understand the practices around it. What information can we not put into there? Like putting research into ChatGPT that is not the enterprise version. Well, that's bad. That's not good. Don't do that. But your team needs to be trained on that. What are those security practices, particularly if you're in some of the more highly regulated industries?
Yeah, totally. I think that, Casey, that question is one step down from like, how is the government going to regulate AI? Like,
We'll
absolutely
see.
not. Um,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, I know, I really like that one. Okay, we're also getting, obviously a bunch of questions about teams and from team leaders wondering how do we like not only obviously how do you teach your team
Yeah.
especially when you're so new into it, but should we allocating time for our teams to explore and play? Should we be
Yeah.
allocating time for them to be more creative and to work out some of the tools by themselves? And should we be providing that sort of training? And what is that training? Like,
Yeah.
that's the big question is like, there's so many things and there's so much to learn. What is that training and how do I as a team leader go about implementing that to my organization?
I think it's AI art direction. That's the number one skill across disciplines that we need to start developing, which includes those, you know, understanding what seeds and tokens are, which is, machine language, but it's really important to understanding how to get quality out of our AI generators. It's understanding how to translate your belief systems, so your principles, your libraries, into prompts that can generate and get the things that you want. So now's the time to start that, to develop that AI art direction skill set. The way you can do that is one, it can be fun, right? Like you could have, 30 minutes or an hour every week where the team gets together and eats some food and hangs out and just like make stuff and share. Like we need to be curious. We need to hold space for play because it can actually be really fun and creative. But I will say the thing that I know about designers is they're afraid to show work in progress. And the first stuff I made with generative AI is it looked like really crappy stuff I made in college, right? It was hideous. I don't want any of you to see it. Some of you saw some of it, but we have to get over that. We have to get over our perfection. We just have to hold a space for our team to make ugly things, to make imperfect things in the spirit of learning. And it doesn't have
Also,
to.
we
Oh, go
have
ahead.
someone to blame now. We can blame the machine for being terrible.
Exactly. "Oh, look at what Midjourney did. It wasn't me." But if we hold that space for us to experiment and play, then we will learn. Well, we will focus on the creativity. So I think
Mhm.
it's that space, but again, find one use case, one workflow at least that you can change as a team and experiment with safely. Because I know you're all busy. Your teams have high demands. You're not going to change everything overnight, which is why you start now, right? Start with incremental changes. Pick one workflow, work on it, learn from it, and then you'll build over time because you're not going to overhaul everything at night. You still have to deliver stuff. I know that.
Yeah, that was what I was gonna say is if I can, be the collective voice of the room right now, but Mia, that all sounds really tough. Like, who has time to learn any of this? Like, how am I gonna learn a whole new language for prompting and not only what tokens are, but then how to actually go through and use them, and that sort of thing. And I mean, I think we're gonna talk about that next week in the workflow session, but like the answer actually is we use AI to help us to do that. Like we use other tools to help us to learn so that we don't actually have to know. You know, um, we're going from an era of um, outwork to outthink.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite quotes of all time is the quality of your life, or in this stage, the quality of your work can be measured by the quality of the questions that you ask.
Yeah.
And so most of this, when we talk about prompt engineers and prompt engineering, a lot of this is just the type of questions that we ask the machine. And I say questions rather than prompts or statements because the machine also can give us the answers to what the best prompt is for things. There is a process to learn this stuff, but it doesn't have to be, we don't now need to learn everything here, right? We actually only need to learn the few little bits here that will help us get through every single stage. And I think that's a big scary thing for everyone because like, but with, 10,000 tools and going from image to text to audio to content output to product design, like as if we're going to have the space and time. We still have jobs and families and, tequila to be drinking. Um, the, you know, the answer is we don't have to learn all of that stuff. And that's what we're figuring out really quickly. We
No.
actually only need to learn how to think about it and ask questions.
And just remember that the way that we work with our tools is different than our engineering partners. They've always worked in a similar way. This is how they built products. That is not
Yeah.
how we build products. We're in our heads with some artboards, kind of doing some stuff on intuition and some processing. Now we have to translate that into our tools, which we haven't had to do before. So it is going to be a shift, but I think it will be for the better. So let's start now. Let's start experimenting and playing. And I know we're almost out of time. So I have to do this reminder of a couple things, ways to continue the conversation. So, like I mentioned, 2 weeks from now, we're going to continue this conversation. Bring your questions. We will just do a full hour of discussion with you
Mhm.
around your top questions. We have some other series that Jeremy and I are doing around workflows. So you can join us next week for those workflows as well, where we'll dig deeper into our reviews of products and how to figure out how to get started. And then overall, from a training perspective, you can join as a member to Designing with AI to get access to this evolving curriculum, live learning labs with us, speaker series, or give us a call and we can work on training for your team. So we have resources. And some of you have heard me say this before, but I just want to say it one more time because I think this is a pivotal moment for us. I like to say design or be designed. And I think as a discipline, as a group of people who love to make things in the world, this is our moment to design our discipline and not be designed by the way that technology is evolving. So we have the
Very
opportunity.
well said.
So let's go shape it. All right. Well,
Awesome.
thank you all
Thank
for
you, man. That
joining.
was brilliant.
Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks for joining me. And hopefully we'll see you all next time.
Thanks, Sarah. Bye.
Bye, everyone.